The air in the study was thick with dust and dread, trapped in the heat of a Georgia July. It was 1847. The only sounds were the frantic scratching of a pen and the low, guttural sobs of a man kneeling on the fine Persian rug. "You cannot mean this," he choked out, his face a ruin of disbelief and sweat. "Mother, for God's sake, you are not in your right mind." At the great mahogany desk, Elizabeth Mayfield, mistress of Willow Creek Plantation, did not look up. Her hand, pale and thin as old parchment, moved steadily across the last page of the document. The sickness had carved her into a wraith, but her eyes, burning in their sunken sockets, were fiercely clear. The man weeping at her feet was her only living child, Jonathan. "It is done," she said, her voice a dry rustle. She sprinkled sand across the wet ink, the grains falling like a tiny, final hourglass. "To him," Jonathan whispered, the word curdling in his mouth. He followed his mother's gaze to the corner of the room, where a young man stood silently beside the bookcase. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that seemed to discomfort him more than chains ever had. His face was a mask of profound stillness, but his eyes, the same peculiar shade of sea green as the woman at the desk, were fixed on the window, watching a lone buzzard circle over the cotton fields. His name was Thomas. He was, by law, by ledger, by the very world's understanding, her slave. Jonathan stumbled to his feet, his finger jabbing toward Thomas. "You leave everything to him. The land, the house, the accounts, my inheritance, to this. And to me. $1 to be paid upon my death, in recognition of a debt settled." He recited the hateful line with a trembling jaw. "This is madness. They will tear it apart. The courts, the neighbors, they will say you were coerced, that you were diseased in mind." For the first time, Elizabeth turned her head fully to her son. The love that had once been there had long since calcified into a cold, stony disappointment. "They may say what they wish. The truth is written. Mr. Clancy has witnessed it. The law will see it executed." The overseer, Silas Rourke, stood just inside the door, his hat in his hands, his brutish face slack with a confusion that bordered on terror. The old order, the unshakable foundation of his world, was crumbling before him. His eyes darted from the broken white air to the poised black man who was now, incomprehensibly, his master. Thomas finally moved. He walked forward, not to gloat, not to speak, but to pour a single glass of water from the crystal pitcher. He placed it gently before the dying woman, his long fingers briefly meeting hers on the desktop. A look passed between them, freighted with a history no one else in the room could fathom. It was a look of understanding, of a secret compact forged in the silent, suffering heart of Willow Creek. Jonathan saw it. He saw the bond that excluded him utterly. With a cry that was half rage, half despair, he swept the glass from the desk. It shattered against the hearth, a sudden, sharp music of dissolution. "Then rot in hell," he hissed, and stormed from the room, leaving the echo of his fury hanging in the still, oppressive air. Elizabeth Mayfield leaned back, exhaustion claiming her. Her eyes found Thomas's again. "It is yours now," she breathed. "Tell it. When I am gone, tell it all." He merely bowed his head. The buzzard outside wheeled once more against the bleached sky. The will lay on the desk, its letters still damp, a heresy in ink that promised to burn the plantation world to the ground. 23 years earlier, in the slave quarters of Willow Creek, a child was born into the whispering dark. His mother, Celia, was a field hand with hands like knotted rope and a voice that could soothe the fiercest headache. His father was gone, sold down river to Mississippi 2 months prior for talking back to an overseer. The birth was a quiet, furtive event. New life here was a currency with fluctuating value, a potential asset or a hungry mouth. The boy was named Thomas. His first cradle was a cracked corn sack, his first lullaby the groan of frogs from the creek and the distant, fretful cry of a whippoorwill. He learned the world through sensation, the gritty dust of the cabin floor, the sour-sweet smell of his mother's sweat after a day in the fields, the hard, cold feeling of being small in a very large, dangerous place. His first clear memory was of separation. He was perhaps 4, clinging to his mother's leg as she stood in line before the portico of the great house. Master Mayfield, a man with a laugh like a rusty gate, was showing off his stock to a visiting planter from Charleston. Celia was young and strong. The Charleston man nodded, his fingers pinching the muscle of her arm. Thomas, peeking from behind her tattered skirts, was peered at. A bit scrawny. "Takes after the father, I'd wager," the Charleston man said dismissively. But Master Mayfield's new wife, Elizabeth, just 22 and still uneasy in her role, was watching from a wicker chair. She had been watching the small, grave-faced boy who didn't whimper like the others. "He has quiet eyes," she said, almost to herself. The comment was neither kindness nor condemnation. It was an observation, like noting the color of a bird's egg. But it was the first time a white person had acknowledged Thomas as anything more than an appendage. That night, Celia held him tightly. "You be quiet, you hear," she whispered, her tears hot on his scalp. "Quiet eyes, quiet feet, quiet mouth. That's how you stay with me." The lesson was seared into him. Silence became his sanctuary. He watched. He learned that the creak of the front gate at dusk meant Master was home, often drunk. That the particular set of Mistress's shoulders meant a headache was coming, and the quarters would need to be extra silent. He learned the rhythm of the lash from Silas Rourke, who had taken over as overseer, not its constant song, but its occasional, punctuating crack, a period of pain ending someone's sentence of defiance. At 7, Thomas was given his first task, to fan the mistress with a broad palmetto leaf during her afternoon rest on the upstairs gallery. It was a job for a child, a house nigger starter duty. He stood for hours, his small arms aching, stirring the thick, honeysuckle-scented air. He said nothing. He barely moved. He simply watched. He watched Elizabeth Mayfield stare out over the verdant hell of her prosperity. He saw the books she read, poetry, mostly, and the way her fingers would sometimes tremble as she turned a page. He saw the emptiness in her face when her husband boomed up the stairs, smelling of whiskey and horses. He saw her flinch, just once, when a particularly sharp cry of punishment rose from the far fields. It was a flinch she quickly smoothed away with a sip of julep, but Thomas caught it. He stored it away in the vault of his quietness. Willow Creek was not a plantation of legendary brutality. Its evil was administrative, insidious. It was a machine that ran on routine indifference. The cruelty was in the measured allotment of food, just enough cornmeal and fatback to keep a body working, never enough to thrive. It was in the shoes doled out every 2 years, thin-soled and ill-fitting, that blistered feet in summer and froze them in winter. It was in the way Silas Rourke would check the line at night, his lantern light piercing the cracks in the cabin walls, ensuring no extra candle was burning, no secret gathering was taking place. Master Mayfield viewed his enslaved people with the bland attention of a man checking livestock. He was proud of their condition. They were well kept, meaning they dropped dead less often than on some neighboring estates. His sins were those of omission, of a soul so calcified by entitlement that compassion never even occurred to him. Elizabeth's relationship to the system was more complex. She believed in the order of things, in the God-given hierarchy. She could speak with pity of her people and, in the same hour, order a child sold for breaking a prized porcelain figurine. Her occasional kindnesses were like snowflakes on a hot griddle, brief, melting instantly into the steaming reality of her power. She might send a tonic for Celia's cough, but she would not hesitate to have Celia whipped if the day's picking fell short. This moral contradiction was not a turmoil for her, it was simply the water in which she swam. Thomas, fanning her, cleaning her rooms, running her errands, became an object of this conflicted regard. He was so quiet, so unerringly competent. He learned to anticipate her needs, the specific pen she liked, the way to fold her shawl. He was a mirror that reflected back only service. In him, she saw not a person, but a perfect, silent instrument. And in her, he saw the gears of the machine up close, the keys that locked the storehouse, the ledger where people were listed beside mules and wagons, the petty worries that took precedence over human suffering. His unique trait, his silence, was a survival skill honed to an art. But within that silence, a formidable intelligence was at work. He taught himself to read by studying the discarded newspapers used to line drawers, piecing together letters and sounds, his lips moving soundlessly in the dark of his cabin. He learned numbers by watching the accounts in the plantation office when he was sent to fetch a ledger. He mapped the entire 1,200 acres of Willow Creek in his mind, its hidden paths, its swampy boundaries, the sound the creek made when it was deep enough to cross unseen. He was 12 when the first great test of his silence came. His mother, Celia, worn down by years in the field and a heart perpetually aching for her lost love, took ill. It was a wet, consuming cough. Elizabeth, in a fit of paternalistic concern, sent her to the sick house, a drafty shack near the smokehouse. Thomas was allowed to visit her each evening. He would sit by her pallet, holding her hand, saying nothing. One night, her fever was high. Her eyes glittered in the dark. "You got your daddy's mind," she rasped. He saw things clear, too. "It's a burden. They can't take what's in here." She tapped his temple weakly. "But they can break the vessel that holds it. You be the creek, boy. Smooth on top, running deep underneath. You remember everything. For me. For him. For all of us who can't tell it." She died 2 nights later. Thomas was not permitted to attend the burying. He was told to polish the silver for a dinner party. That night, standing over the cream jug and spoons, his reflection warped in their curved surfaces, he made a vow in his profound quiet. He would remember. He would be the vessel. And he would wait. Thomas turned 15, then 16. He was given more responsibility, graduated from fan-bearer to a sort of personal attendant to Elizabeth, especially after Master Mayfield died suddenly of a heart attack, leaving her a widow at 35. Jonathan, their son, was away at a military academy in Virginia, shaping his arrogance into a fine, gentlemanly point. Willow Creek became a kingdom of two, the mournful, bookish mistress and the preternaturally observant slave. A strange, unspoken dependency grew. Elizabeth, isolated by her gender and her grief, began to talk at Thomas. She mused about her disappointing son, about the burdens of management, about the poetry of Byron. She did not expect a response, and he gave none. He was a confessional, a silent receptacle for her loneliness. In his stillness, she found a perverse sort of peace. He, in turn, learned everything. He knew the estate was struggling. Knew the debts her husband had left. Knew which overseers were skimming profits, which neighbors could not be trusted. He held this knowledge like a knife hidden in his clothes. The tension escalated slowly, as the heat of summer builds. Silas Rourke grew resentful of Thomas's proximity to the mistress. He saw the boy's quiet confidence as insolence. One afternoon, he accused Thomas of stealing a ham from the smokehouse, a crime Rourke himself had committed. 15 lashes, Rourke declared, a cruel smile playing on his lips. He wanted to hear the quiet boy scream, to break that infuriating composure. Elizabeth was consulted. She was in her study, reviewing the failing accounts. She looked from Rourke's brutish certainty to Thomas's impassive face. For a long moment, she said nothing. Thomas felt the old, cold fear. This was the machine, grinding predictably. "I do not believe he took it," Elizabeth said finally, her voice quiet but firm. "Search your own quarters, Mr. Rourke. The matter is closed." It was not justice. It was the caprice of a monarch protecting a favorite tool. But it was a crack in the foundation. Rourke's face purpled with humiliated rage. Thomas, dismissed, walked back to the quarters, his heart pounding not with relief, but with a new, terrifying understanding. His safety was as fragile as her whim. And her whim had just made him a target. The betrayal came not from Rourke directly, but from the system itself. A neighboring planter, a coarse, ambitious man named Governor Blakely, began calling on Elizabeth. He spoke of consolidation, of marriage, of modernizing Willow Creek. His eyes, when they fell on Thomas, were calculating. "You've a sharp one there, Elizabeth," Blakely said one evening over port. "Too sharp for housework. I've a new cotton gin operation, could use a foreman of his temperament. I'd pay a fine price. help you with those debts." Thomas, pouring the port, felt the world tilt. To be sold was to vanish, to be erased. All his silent learning, his vow to his mother, would die in some brutal, anonymous workshed. Elizabeth smiled vaguely. "Thomas is indispensable, Governor. I could not manage without him." It was a stay of execution, not a pardon. Thomas understood his value had just been quantified aloud. He was a thing to be kept or sold based on utility. That night, for the first time, his quiet boiled into a silent, desperate rage. The plan began to form in the deep-running creek of his mind. Not escape, not yet. The swamps were patrolled, the dogs were swift. But another kind of survival. A deeper, more dangerous game. The turning point arrived on a rain-lashed night in the autumn of 1845. Jonathan had returned from Virginia, a man now, brimming with contempt for his mother's sentimental management and a lord's sense of his own inheritance. He and Blakely were like-minded, and their talk turned to necessary reforms. Thomas, serving them in the drawing room, heard the plan. They would convince Elizabeth to sell off the dead weight, the older slaves, the young children not yet productive. Thomas, as a valuable asset, would be kept, but broken to a new purpose under Jonathan's direct control. "That one needs to remember what he is," Jonathan sneered, swirling his brandy. "A bit of time with Rourke will scour out that look in his eye." The look. The quiet eyes Elizabeth had noted long ago. They were now a threat. Thomas knew the time for passive observation was over. That night, he performed his duties with meticulous care. As he banked the fire in Elizabeth's bedroom, she was staring into the flames, a ledger open on her lap, her face etched with despair. "They mean to take it all from me," she murmured, not truly to him, but to the room. "My son. He sees only the money. He does not see Willow Creek. He does not love the land." Thomas stopped. He had never initiated speech with her. The risk was monumental. But the knife was at his throat. "I see the land, Miss Elizabeth," he said, his voice low, but clear in the crackling silence. She started, turning to look at him as if he had suddenly materialized. "What did you say?" He met her gaze, the sea-green eyes holding hers. "I know the land. The North 40 soil is tired. It needs rye, not cotton, for a season. The creek is shifting, it's washing away the best soil on the south border. You need a levee there, not a new carriage. The debt with the bank in Savannah, it's not the principal that's choking you, it's the compounding interest. You could renegotiate if you used the timber from the west stand as collateral." The words fell into the room like stones into a still pond. He had just articulated everything she vaguely sensed but could not precisely grasp. He had seen it, remembered it, calculated it. She was astounded. How do you know these things?" "I have watched," he said simply. "And I remember." In that moment, the dynamic that had defined their lives shattered. The silent instrument had spoken, and in doing so, revealed itself to be a mind, a strategist, a partner in understanding the very thing she loved, the plantation. It was a terrifying, electrifying revelation. From that night forward, their relationship entered a clandestine, dangerous new phase. Under the guise of fetching her books or adjusting her shawl, he would advise her. She began to rely on him not just for service, but for counsel. She saw the cold, avaricious future her son and Blakely represented, a future of exhausted soil, broken spirits, and eventual ruin. In Thomas, she saw a steward. A perverse, impossible, but undeniable truth took root in her. The only person who cared for Willow Creek as a living entity, not just a purse, was the enslaved men she owned. It was a moral abyss. She could not free him, the law, society, her own crumbling world forbade it. But she could use him. And in using him, she bound herself to him in a conspiracy against her own blood, her own race, her own century. The final 2 years were a slow-burning fever dream. Jonathan's suspicions grew. Rourke's hatred festered. Thomas walked a razor's edge, his quiet now a facade for immense, secret influence. Elizabeth, aging and increasingly frail, made her decision. She called for the family lawyer, a discreet and morally flexible man named Mr. Clancy. She dictated the will in Thomas's presence. Clancy blanched, protested, warned of the legal and social inferno it would ignite. Elizabeth was immovable. "Write it," she said, the ghost of her old authority giving the words final weight. She left her entire fortune, land, chattel, investments, everything, to my faithful servant, Thomas, to be held in trust for him, with his full freedom and manumission granted upon my death, and all properties and chattels to pass to his sole ownership and direction. To Jonathan, she left the silver dollar and the damning line about a settled debt. She knew it was a weapon, not a gift. The will would be challenged. It might even be overturned. But it would be a public scorching of her son's character. It would be a declaration, etched in legal parchment, that the moral order of Willow Creek was a lie. And it would give Thomas, the quiet vessel of memory, a fighting chance. It would give him the story, written in unassailable ink, to tell. Elizabeth Mayfield died 3 days after signing the will. The storm broke instantly. Jonathan contested. The case became a notorious scandal, whispered about in parlors and argued in courtrooms across Georgia. How could a white woman of sound mind do such a thing? Surely she was coerced, bewitched, insane. Thomas, now a free man in the eyes of this one document but living in a volcano of white fury, was questioned, threatened, and vilified. But he had learned from the master of silence. He said little. He let the will speak. And he had one, final, deeply hidden piece of knowledge. In her final weeks, Elizabeth had given him a small, iron key. It opened a compartment in her late husband's desk. Inside, Thomas found old letters, and a bill of sale. The letters were from Master Mayfield to a colleague, boasting of a prime buck he'd purchased years ago, a man of intelligence and spirit from the Carolina coast, a man who had to be broken. The bill of sale was for that man, Isaiah, sold to Mississippi. With the letters was a later note, in Elizabeth's own hand, a private, agonized scrawl, "I saw the eyes today, in the boy Thomas. The same as that man Isaiah. My husband always said the child was scrawny, took after the father. He did not know I had seen the man once, in the yard. He had the same eyes. Sea green. My husband sold his own son. And I have lived with the product of his sin, and called him property. God forgive me. Jonathan is my blood, but he is his father's true heir in soul. Thomas is the only one who is mine." Thomas read it by candlelight, the words swimming before him. The final, devastating piece of the story slid into place. Her guilt, her twisted restitution, her warped maternal claim, it was not just about the land. It was about a crime within a crime. She had left her fortune not just to a slave, but to the living evidence of her husband's cruelty and her own complicity. She had disinherited her legitimate son for the sin of being his father's mirror, and enriched her husband's illegitimate child as a penance. The court case dragged on for years, eating the estate in legal fees. Thomas never took possession of Willow Creek as a working plantation. In a bitter, compromised settlement, the bulk of the land was finally awarded to Jonathan, but only after a massive monetary judgment was paid to Thomas, a small fortune. Thomas took his money and his freedom and vanished from Georgia. He went north, then west, carrying the weight of the story with him. He built a life, educated his children, but he never spoke of Willow Creek. The memory was too heavy, too laden with pain and a terrible, ambiguous grace. He had been a vessel of silence, then a vessel of memory, and finally, a vessel of a fortune born from guilt. The plantation mistress's will was not an act of love, but a last, furious stroke of the pen to correct a ledger, to acknowledge a truth that the world refused to see. She had given him not just wealth, but the means to tell a story of quiet eyes, of a creek running deep, of a crime that could only be answered with a scandal so great it would echo in the court records long after the cotton had rotted in the fields and the great house had fallen to ruin. It was a story of how, in the heart of the monstrous machine of slavery, the most improbable and destabilizing force of all could sometimes emerge, a conscience, however flawed, and the relentless, remembering mind of a child who was told he was nothing, and proved, in the end, to be the heir to everything.